India and UAE, and a very good afternoon to Ireland. Hope everyone is safe during this pandemic. I am Ishika Mohanraj, a final year BCom student of Seshadripuram Evening Degree College. Welcome to the 48th International Webinar of Seshadripuram Evening Degree College. At the outset, I'm happy to inform you all that our Evening Degree College is celebrating its Golden Jubilee year. On behalf of our college, we congratulate all the stakeholders. Today's webinar is completely hosted by the students of Seshadripuram Evening Degree College. Therefore, I request everyone to kindly pardon us in case of any mistakes. Department of English, in association with Trinity College, Dublin, Ireland, and New York University, Abu Dhabi, UAE, is organizing this international webinar on Digital Humanities, Session 11. Now, I request Nagasudha ma'am, Assistant Professor, Department of Commerce, to play a small video of our college. Over to you, ma'am.
A great journey begins with a small step. Proving this statement true, it all began in 1930 when two women, educational enthusiasts, took up a noble initiative. In the erstwhile posh locality of Seshadripuram, Srimati Anandamma and Srimati Seethamma started a primary school with 20 children. Now, Seshadripuram Educational Trust, under its umbrella, has 36 institutions. It all began with the educational visionary Sri K.M. Nanjappa, the then President of Seshadripuram Educational Trust, in 1971, which has been a landmark in the history of education for the working students by starting Seshadripuram Evening College.
Our college started with the primary objective of imparting formal education to the quality and needy. The college is affiliated to the Bengaluru Central University. Being in the heart of the city, it has an easy reach and connectivity. Its premises comprise of spacious building with good canteen, computerized library, business lab, browsing center, Wi-Fi facility, sports club, thus well equipped for all academic, sports, co-curricular like NSS, NCC, YRC, etc. and extracurricular activities throughout the year. The college organizes orientation program for freshers and guest lecturers to equip them.
As most of us are working in the morning and studying in an evening degree college, it is very facilitative for us to excel in our jobs. Even though we are studying in an evening degree college, we are being provided many state level and national level opportunities to express our talents. Also, many cultural activities are being conducted.
SEDC is engaged in various cultural activities throughout the year. There are numerous committees in the college that perform variedly on their behalf and have a lasting effect on the college, students as well as outsiders.
Our evening degree college believes in the vision to ignite the minds of every student to identify and develop their inner strength, with the mission to promote holistic development of students by offering quality education and making them self-reliant and progressive.
Our college NCC cadets will visit every academic year in Officers Training Academy Chennai and INS Kadamba Naval Base at Karwar. It will motivate our college NCC cadets to join Indian Armed Forces.
Thank you, Nagasudha ma'am. I now request Sumukha of third year BCom to welcome and introduce all the dignitaries to this international webinar. Over to you, Sumukha.
A very good afternoon to Ireland and a happy evening to India and the United Arab Emirates. I take this opportunity to welcome you all for this 48th international webinar of our college. At the outset, I would like to thank all the office bearers of this great institution and welcome all of them. Now, I would like to introduce and welcome today's first theme speaker, Dr. Jennifer Edmond, Associate Professor, School Office Language Lit and Cut, Trinity College, the University of Dublin, Ireland. Jennifer Madam is an Associate Professor of Digital Humanities at Trinity College, Dublin, where she is the coordinator of the Trinity Center of Digital Humanities, Director of MPhil in Digital Humanities and Culture, and a funded investigator of the SFI Adapt Center. Outside of Trinity, Jennifer serves as President of the Board of Directors of the Pan-European Research Infrastructure for the Arts and Humanities. Dira Yuan was representative for this organization on the European Commission's Open Science Policy platform from 2016 to 2020. Over the course of the past 10 years, Jennifer has coordinated transnational, local, or field-specific teams in the large number and significant inter- and transdisciplinary funded research projects worth a total of almost 9 million, including Sendrai, European Cloud, Pantheon, Scapelex, Provide DH, and the Spectrus Network. Her current work explores interdisciplinary, humanistic, and hybrid research process and the emergence of critical digital humanities as a contributor to both research and technology development. Ma'am, on behalf of Seshadripuram Education Trust, I welcome you for this webinar.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome. I'm sorry for the mouthful of acronyms that are a part of
I shall just welcome all the dignitaries and then you can.
Very good. Then I'll unshare my screen while you finish welcome.
Today's second theme speaker, Dr. David Joseph Wrisley, Associate Professor of Digital Humanities, New York University, Abu Dhabi, UAE. David Sir is an Associate Professor of Digital Humanities at the NYU Abu Dhabi. He was trained as a medievalist and during the early part of his career published in comparative literature, history of translation, and court culture. His current research interest includes subtial humanities, handwritten text recognition across writing systems and digital humanities community building in the Middle East. His research has appeared in digital scholarship in the humanities, digital studies, Speculum, Egypti, Monde, Arabic, Le Moyen Frontier, as well as in computer science conferences. He has lived in the Middle East since 2002, where he co-founded 2 digital humanities training institutes. The Digital Humanities Institute, Beirut in 2015, and the NYU Abu Dhabi Winter Institute in Digital Humanities in 2020. Sir, on behalf of Seshadripuram Educational Trust, I welcome you for this webinar.
Thank you.
Today's third theme speaker, Dr. Arjun Ghosh, Associate Professor, Department of Humanities and Social Science, Indian Institute of Technology, New Delhi. Dr. Arjun Ghosh is an Associate Professor in the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences at the IIT, New Delhi. He works on the politics of performance and mobilization, copyright and intellectual property, new media, and the digital humanities. He was formerly a fellow at the Indian Institute of Advanced Study, Shimla, and currently teaches at IIT Delhi. He is the author of a history of the Jananatya Manch, Place for the People, and Freedom from Profit, eschewing copyright in resistance art, and then a noted translation of Nabana. He also has joined IIT Jodhpur as an adjunct professor to the interdisciplinary research platform in the digital humanities for the year 2020-2021. Sir, on behalf of Seshadripuram Educational Trust, I welcome you for this webinar.
Thank you for inviting me, and I'm very happy to be here.
It's my proud privilege to introduce and welcome one more distinguished person who is presiding in this webinar, Shri W.D. Ashok Sir, Honorary Trustee, Seshadripuram Educational Trust, Bengaluru, India. Sir holds a master degree in pharmacy specialized in the field of total parental nutrition. He served at the famous Al-Adan Hospital, Kuwait for over 13 years. He is an honorary trustee of Seshadripuram Educational Trust. Sir is the backbone for all the events conducted in our college. Sir, on behalf of Seshadripuram Evening Degree College, I welcome and request you to preside over the function. I would also like to welcome our beloved principal, Professor N.S. Satish Sir, who is the man of perfection and a guiding force for having organized 47 international webinars conducted so far. On behalf of our English department, I welcome you, sir. I welcome all the office bearers and trustees of Seshadripuram Educational Trust and all the principals of our sister institution, other heads of institution, conveners, volunteers, and all participants who have registered across the globe. I welcome Dharappa Konnur sir, Program Coordinator, and Rajat BS sir, IQAC Coordinator. And finally, I welcome our own teaching and administrative staff for this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. May I now request our first keynote speaker, Dr. Jennifer Edmond, Associate Professor, School Office Language Lytton Kulstad, Trinity College, the University of Dublin, Ireland, to enlighten us on the topic, Realizing the Critical Digital Humanities. Over to you, ma'am.
Very good. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I feel a bit of a fraud in some ways hearing an introduction like that, because one of the things that I think is important to understand about the approach that I take to digital humanities is that it comes from a very practical grounding. I was not in an academic job for many of the years of my career. I was instead working to support the digital humanities amongst my colleagues. And this has led me to work almost at a meta level. I almost say I don't do the digital humanities, I do about the digital humanities. And I think that, however, has actually placed me very well to participate in one of the newer areas that's emerging under the digital humanities umbrella. And that's what I'd like to tell you a little bit about today. So you probably, if you've had the number of webinars that you've had, you've realized that those of us who've been in this field for a long time have struggled to find a single definition we can all agree on as to what this field actually is. And we refer to it, therefore, as the big tent. The digital humanities is a large piece of canvas under which we can all do our work. I've come to think that this metaphor is slightly misleading. In fact, I think of the digital humanities as a continent in which there are unique countries, where you find much more cohesion in terms of the culture, as it were, in terms of the language, the values, the methodologies, the approaches. So while you might think of the digital humanities as a continent, you could also think of things like digital scholarly editing or computational literary studies or digital history, in fact, as countries within that continent. And what I am hoping to do over the next years is to help to develop another country within this continent. This is this idea of the critical digital humanities. Now, the idea of a new subdiscipline or yet another subdiscipline in the digital humanities is not new. In fact, this has been theorized or promoted for quite some time. And I give you a quote here from Gary Hall in his article, Digital Humanities Beyond Computing, where he says, what is just as interesting as what computer science has to offer the humanities is the question of what the humanities, in both their digital and traditional guises, assuming they can be distinguished in this way, which is by no means certain, have to offer computer science. And beyond that, what the humanities themselves can bring to the understanding of computing and the shaping of the digital. Do the humanities really need to draw quite so heavily on computer science to develop their sense of their identity and role in an era of digital media technology? Along with a computational turn in the humanities, might we not also benefit from more of a humanities turn in our understanding of the computational and the digital? Now, this is a 10-year-old quote. And yet what we found is that repeatedly there have been these kinds of calls for a digital humanities that turns almost back on itself and uses almost a humanities-style critique to look at technology. But very few have actually proposed how this is to be delivered in practice. And it's yet more complicated than that. So I present you with another small bit of text. I love to present text. That's where I come from. I'm a textual scholar by training, which is this tweet from Tristan Harris, which was from 2019. If you don't know Tristan Harris, he is an ex-Google person who left the company in order to found something called the Center for Humane Technology. So you can sense that he was both dissatisfied with the corporate approach to technology development, but also felt that grasping onto the humane was important. And he said that we needed a new field of society and technology interaction, since human-computer interaction is limited to individual human plus machine. Now, I would very much agree with Tristan Harris that the limitations of human-computer interaction, which is largely rooted in the discipline of psychology, looking at individual reactions and very often individual responses to technology almost as a consumer more than anything else, the complex sets of relationships we have. But what Tristan Harris didn't seem to realize at that time, and which the respondents to his tweet strongly reminded him of, is that there are other disciplines that exist. For example, science technology studies and my own digital humanities, among others. So how do we actually define a critical digital humanities that does not do what Tristan Harris does and merely say, we need a new discipline, we have digital humanities, let's do what these other disciplines have been doing? So this is the kind of question I like. And I began to look and listen, because for me, this, of course, was a question not only of how digital humanities could contribute, and also how potentially we could contribute to the kinds of challenges we were seeing everywhere in the world, although more so now even than then, but also really to my own sense of identity as a scholar. Again, not really being within the scholarly workflows and professional development, I had to feel like I had to invent something new. So I started to listen. And I started to listen to a number of different things, and I was hearing very interesting things. First of all, I started noticing that there were companies such as Red Associates, which is a Scandinavian consultancy firm, which was using Heidegger to solve the problems of technology companies. This is very interesting as someone who trained in German. I noticed people like Stuart Butterworth and Mitchell Baker from Slack and Mozilla, respectively, saying that the skill sets that they needed were a humanities skill set. And I was finding books such as Scott Hartley's The Fuzzy and the Techie, which were essentially saying the same thing. And I was thinking, okay, so there really is something that science technology studies is not doing that a humanities skill set probably can, or at least in the opinion of these companies and thinkers. And then, of course, once you see the positive side, you probably also see the negative side. And these are two very different examples of the kinds of input I was feeding myself on at that time. The first on the left-hand side is a billboard. This is not my picture, but this is the billboard I saw in London, which said that analyzing big data is the secret to living happily ever after. I think I know people who believe this, but of course, the fact that this company was drawing on fairy tale and myth, this is something I know a little bit about as a literature scholar. And I thought that actually, no, fairy tale and myth is the secret to living happily ever after. Data analytics most certainly is not. It's a very creepy set of advertisements. If you're interested in these kinds of things, I encourage you to look them up. But also, this was around the time that we were beginning to see the entry of the large American-based technology firms into markets that culturally they were really not prepared to deal with. And of course, I put the example of Myanmar there because I think it's one of the strongest examples of how culture matters when you're rolling out technology. And if you don't understand that, you can not only make mistakes that will harm your bottom line, but actually do far greater harm. And then this happened. My dear Mark Zuckerberg. My students get very tired of me talking about Mark Zuckerberg. But this was a very interesting post that he put out, of course, on Facebook about the release of the Facebook algorithms for machine translation. Now, I laud Facebook for being so open with their IP. I think it's important for the development of science that we are able to share these things. However, the assumption that throughout human history, language has been a barrier to communication, and that it's amazing we get to live in a time when technology can change that, really made me, again, as a scholar of literature and language, stop and wonder what on earth he was thinking. Because of course, without language, we would have a very impoverished form of communication indeed. And again, as someone who struggled their way through many foreign languages, the joy and the discovery of the cultural system that underpins a language is really, to me, something that is quite precious and important, and something that machine translation really can't give you, or at least certainly can't give you now, and perhaps never will. So these many things came together to help me form an idea of what critical digital humanities might uniquely contribute above and beyond what we already had from human-computer interaction, science technology studies, and these sorts of disciplines. And what I thought was, first of all, we would use humanities methods. because even when we hybridize with other disciplines, there is very often within the digital humanities a core appreciation of culture and the complexity of culture that allows us to see and do things somewhat differently. And I think an example of this for me, I'll talk in a moment about how we applied these ideas, was that even when we do interviews, there is a way to do an interview as a journalist. There's a way to do an interview as a social scientist. And yes, there is a way, I think, to work with interview data as a humanist, because what I look for in an interview is perhaps examples of language use, or perhaps the way in which the speaker is creating a narrative of identity, a narrative of creation, a narrative of discovery. That is actually quite different from the kinds of evidence a social scientist would seek. And this is something I've learned by working closely with social scientists and their methods. I think it's also important that this new critical digital humanities I wanted to try and experiment with would use humanities sources. I wanted us to be able to use literature as evidence for something. I wanted us to be able to draw in historical material as something that could inform not just our understanding of the past, but our understanding of the present, and perhaps even our actions into the future. Probability is important, and the predictive ability of many algorithms is important as a driver for these kinds of things. But I felt that there were other complementary approaches we could take, and that without them, we would have fewer tools in our toolkit. And in a complex world of many problems, we need as many tools in the toolkit as we can get. But one of the key things for me, and many of you may know this framework of thinking about the digital humanities, is the idea of hack and yak. The idea that perhaps the humanities talk too much, they theorize too much, and that one of the things the digital humanities brought to them was the ability to build as well, to create things, to be applied, and to have to test theories and test ideas in that concrete way. So one of the things I really bring in particular to my teaching, as I'll speak of in a minute, is the idea that we need to be able to read the technological theory. I can't use a tool if I don't know it, just as I couldn't use a theoretical writer if I hadn't read the text. So how do we read the text of technology that underlies our knowledge making in the digital humanities? And this also freed us up to not just be theoretical, but also to create, to build, to explore in the space where something's being developed and not just thought about and described. And of course, another thing that this new subdiscipline for me would be to bring that interdisciplinary collaborative frame that was not a part of my training as a traditional humanist. So, sorry, we don't need to go back to Mark Zuckerberg. So now I'll go to examples of how this has really changed my identity of my field and my scholarship, and in some ways my identity as a scholar now that I am once again in a validated scholarly position. And I'm going to look at research, teaching, and service, because these are commonly the three things we consider to be part of an academic career. The research, I think, is in many ways the easiest to describe. So in 2017, 2018, we had a European funded project called KPLEX, or Knowledge Complexity. This came from the idea actually of the European Commission that many of their ICT areas would benefit from something called a sister project. And the fact that it was a feminine sister is something that we could talk about, but we'll leave that to the side for now. These sister projects were paired with the large ICT investments in order to provide a humanities and social scientist counterpoint to that, which was independent, led by those disciplines, but very much tied in with the activities of the other larger disciplines. They would be interdisciplinary, but as I said, a humanities-led focus. And in our case, we look specifically on language use, identity formation, values, and epistemic cultures around big data-driven research. This led us not only to be in our humanities bubble and working with ICT professionals, but also in a number of Europe's large public-private partnerships. So we were around the table with industry representatives as well through the Big Data Public-Private Partnership, the Big Data Value Association, and other organizations like that. The outputs and findings from this relatively short project were incredibly rich. There is a data set available openly of our interviews, 38 in total, with a number of different perspectives represented, talking about how they used big data and what their concerns about it were. There was a number of formal publications. In fact, we have a book forthcoming, hopefully this year, maybe next. An awful lot of public outreach. It amazed us how much public resonance this project had. And we were on Austrian radio and Irish radio. We were in one of the largest newspapers in Vienna. It was really quite interesting how we were able to connect around these technological issues. And of course, we had a lot of meta-level findings about power and data in research cultures. And these were the ones that we largely put into our knowledge exploitation report, which you see the cover of there. And I just put one quote from one of our interviews, because I think it really sums up a lot of what the project was able to achieve. This is an anthropologist talking about their data and how they always have to see their data as related to the researcher and from their standpoint in the landscape and their standpoint in a situation. And of course, one of the concerns we found again and again in big data research was that this context was lost. So the innovation opportunity is, how can we find ways to keep that rich context in? And this is a story we hope will continue. But again, this shows how in a major research project, we were able to bring humanities values, humanities insights, but also combine them with the needs and the requirements of ICT research. Bringing that to the teaching, I run a long-standing master's program in digital humanities and culture, which we also now offer as a diploma and a certificate option. And what is very interesting about this is that we decided in relaunching the master's for this year that we would try and actually bring more of a balance between the digital humanities context as I learned it, where there's a lot of scholarly editing, a lot of data mining, a lot of visualization, text analysis. But what we would do is we would also put that in context of, again, the real world problems we were seeing more and more. And in fact, I talked there about the cultural technical systems course, and I thought this would be a really good way of tying together the perspective of what do we as citizens need to understand about technology and technology companies, and of course, what do we as scholars need to do? So in this balance between the theoretical and the applied in the course, the hack and the yak, as it were, we also have this one course that brings together the theoretical, but also that very deep critical DH social investigation of what technology does for us as organisms that live through the creation of knowledge. So we started with a keyword focus. I thought, well, if we're going to do something that's humanities grounded, it has to be grounded in some of the things we feel we know something about. So we have units on empathy, on identity, on free speech, and about 9 other topics like this. And we take a kind of a headline focus. One of my jobs was to sort of go through the newspaper and find those examples of things that where technology had gone right or gone wrong, where we could see these keywords actually coming through. And then to bring back in that hack and yak, we put a lot of emphasis on untangling what of this problem is technological, what of this problem is commercial or social, and what of this problem is cultural. Are there places where we see people failing to communicate because of language barriers? Are there places where we see values, religion, faith, beliefs, practices actually forming the real substrate of the challenges we're seeing? And then we also draw our readings from a wide interdisciplinary set of scholars from computer science, from science technology studies, from philosophy, from history, from literature, from the arts. So I see it very much as a way of drawing from these various pools, but always understanding that we're coming to this from a humanities point of view. A very successful course, and I think a real addition to our master's offer. Finally, thinking in, well, what does this critical DH standpoint mean for me, again, as a scholarly identity? What does it mean for the service? Before I moved more into critical DH, the other area I'm perhaps more known for is the building of research infrastructure. And that has a very easy to understand service mission within the institution. We help our colleagues to achieve their research goals and to answer their research questions using technology. Even if they don't know what technology they need, we can help them scope that problem. So what does it mean when we move to the critical DH? And I already mentioned the public outreach of the KPLEX project. And I think this is one very important way in which the service of critical DH has for me become quite unique, this aspect of the work. But I'd also say, you know, there's places for activism and gadflyism. And the activism side, actually, it came to me kind of by surprise. You'll notice at the bottom of the screen, I've put the categories from something called Microsoft 365 Analytics. So my university, a very good, you know, bastion of free speech and academic freedom, has a site license for this Microsoft product. And of course, the analytics section of that product comes engaged as a default. In other words, when I looked at this, I found that I was not only being submitted to surveillance by my institution, but also that there were questions around the sharing of that data. In the US, that data is shared back with Microsoft. That's the way the system works. In Europe, we have some protections against that. And I realized I couldn't sit by and let this happen. So I was the sort of the canary in the coal mine, actually making people aware of the fact that if they didn't want to be advised how many hours of meetings they should have a day, they should actually be looking to turn this off. So that's one of the ways I felt that actually it changed my attitude towards my work and my institution in a way that I was not expecting. Another way, again, I think is in my work, my collaboration with computer scientists. This is a robot called Stevie, developed by one of my colleagues, Connor McGinn, in the School of Engineering. And I find it very interesting, the conversations we have, because again, when he looks at a social robotics application, he sees very much the relationship between the individual and the robot and the very positive things that could come out of that. Whereas I tend to look more at a 360-degree view of identity that was trained into me as a humanities scholar. I look at the relationships between people in their own past and their own present, between the people who are dependent on them and the people that they depend on. I look at their relationship at the widest range of those who are on the same planet in terms of environmental cost, or people who are perhaps in the same city in terms of equality and diversity. So I find again that this is a role that embracing this new country within the continent of digital humanities has allowed me to take on. It's been a very exciting development. I think we have a lot more to see in terms of critical DH. And I hope that maybe some of you will take this on as a role for you as students exploring this area. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for your insightful theme address. I now request our second theme speaker, Dr. David Joseph Wrisley, Associate Professor of Digital Humanities, New York University, Abu Dhabi, UAE, to enlighten us on the topic, Digital Humanist in the Loop, Human-Computer Cooperation in the Transcription of Archives. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. I hope I'm audible and that you can view my slides. I have included a link to my slides via a tiny URL, so tinyurl.com DJW for my initials, and SEDC21. And so that would allow you to follow along in case you'd like to see the slides more carefully. So I'd like to thank the organizers very much and to welcome the distinguished guests to this event. It's amazing to be invited and to have the opportunity to speak with you today. So as you heard, that my topic is digital humanist in the loop, which is a bit of a play on words, and also human-computer cooperation, which I'm going to discuss over the course of my talk. So just a little outline of what I'm going to be speaking about today. First, I'm going to be looking at these ideas of interaction and loops. I'm going to be speaking specifically today about archival transcription. And so I'm going to speak a little bit why transcription is important in the historical humanities. I'll be speaking a little bit about the phenomenon of OCR, or optical character recognition, which you might be aware of. And in particular, I'm going to be speaking about automatic transcription, or what is coming to be known as HTR, handwritten text recognition, and this across the languages. I've noticed that several of your speakers have focused on multilingual questions. I thought that those would be a particularly interesting point for an Indian context, given that you are also a multilingual and multi-script society. And then finally, I'm going to talk about this idea, wrap up with the idea of digital humanists in the loop. Now, since no digital humanist, in my opinion, works alone, I just feel that it's necessary for me to acknowledge some of the people who have worked hard with me, distinguished colleagues, also quite intelligent and collaborative students. And I'm not going to take the time to read all their names, but their names are here on the slide. So first to this question of interaction and loop. So we heard in the previous talk about the idea of human-computer interaction, right? Human-computer interaction nowadays, at least in commercial sectors and in computer sciences, usually framed in terms of conversations about artificial intelligence and about the interface of man and machine. And we also heard in the previous talk that there's psychological theories, right, that are very often connected to this. And HCI, or human-computer interaction, foregrounds the quality of interactions and reactions, right? And what we're looking for is, if you like, sort of seamless opportunities to work with a machine. And so they look for, and like the previous speaker, I'm also a humanist, trained in literary studies, where confusion, ambiguity, and misprision are actually valuable encounters. They are moments, there are gaps, as Roland Bach would say, there are moments to investigate situations even more. And yet human-computer interaction tries to avoid those. So one of the things I'm going to argue in my paper is that AI, or artificial intelligence, has definitely arrived for the humanities, and it's evolving rather quickly. But confusion in interaction has by no means been eliminated. In fact, it is, at least for now, a very vibrant field of inquiry. So this other term of the human in the loop, or HITL, also known as user in the loop, is a kind of machine learning that includes human intelligence into the creation of models. In other words, the algorithmic creation or processing of something. And the reason that it includes human beings is that machines can't do it itself. They can't accomplish a task by itself. So this is a field that I've been thinking about for some time and been researching in. And it's also, you might have heard the term active learning if you're a computer scientist. So one of the things I'm also going to argue in my paper today is that AI applications in the humanities, sorry, there's a verb missing there, but AI applications in the humanities require the conversation between computation, the humanities, and a critical digital studies, or rather, that is as essential as ever. Sorry for the jumbled sentence there. You'll notice that on each of the slides, there's also a recommended reading in case you'd like to go and learn a little bit more about the topic. So why transcription talking about today? Well, transcription is kind of a really old phenomenon in historical societies. At the very easiest, it's a kind of copying or typing of a written document. In a more complex definition, it's the creation of a digital representation of a cultural artifact. And so that means engaging with questions of modeling and of the modeling of human knowledge. And in particular, when we move back in time, it becomes complicated because writing systems and ways of communicating knowledge and writing were different. Now, Heutfeld and Sparebrooke McQueen have claimed that transcription is both a process and a product, in the sense that you could say, I have a transcription of that interview, but you could also say, we are making a transcription of a series of archives. And it's in that point, in that tension between process and product, that I'm the most interested in going to be speaking about today. It is the first step for doing digital humanities with historical materials. And it's also, I would claim, a synergistic point between computer science, in particular, machine learning and AI, humanities, and the digital humanities. So why do we transcribe? Well, we transcribe, especially in societies that have strong textual traditions. Scholars have looked at how people copy and transmit text. This is the field that's traditionally known as philology. But scholars themselves also participate in that tradition by editing materials, meaning that they make transcriptions, they make accessible versions of things that have existed from the past. So we transcribe things from the past because the writing systems are too difficult or too slow to read. On the right is a notarial document from southern Italy, which not only requires you to understand Italian, but requires you to understand a handwriting that's often quite difficult to decipher. Transcription is slow and requires specialized skills. And so this is the connection with AI, is that since the labor in doing such transcription is so intensive, the temptation to automate is also equally strong. So there are some reasons why we want to transcribe archives. Here we have two small visualizations, one from a museum of comparative zoology at Harvard, where people have taken tables people used to collect data by hand in tables, and they've taken those and extracted those information so that they can do a comparison. They can make a plot, talk about something that they know about field notes and specimens of zoology from the past. The corner and the one in the bottom corner comes from our project at NYU Abu Dhabi called about the Bashir residency papers of the British India government. And this one is inside of a research group called the Open Gulf. And this is looking at clusters of frequency in words in colonial correspondence done in English. So in other words, we transcribe archives because for a lot of different reasons. We want to be able to search in them. We want to be able to do research, better research. We want to, even if you're a librarian, you would use this to create metadata. You can even use transcription just because you have some words to boost the discoverability of your archives on the net. So I have been approached this from the question of text as data approach. So there have been, interestingly enough, in 2020 and before, but particularly in 2020, a boost or proliferation of public transcription projects. And this is an interesting place where the digital GLAM sector, or galleries, libraries, archives, and museums, have come together kind of in the moment of pandemic to think about things which are social, which are open, which are collective and engage with the public, but can also be done, they're possible in a moment of home office or remote classrooms. Now, this kind of transcription is actually very slow, right? This actually involves human beings having digitized versions and then typing slowly. And there are problems with doing transcription that way because humans are not all, don't make the same choices when they see something and when they type something. So, but if you can, I also created a Venn diagram like the previous speaker, that if you think about this world of creating text through transcription, I created this where I have different versions of how you might actually do that. So on the left-hand side are things where you might actually have contact with a document, right? Where you might copy something by hand, like I did when I was in graduate school at national libraries inside of manuscript rooms. But you might also take digitization equipment to an archive to actually do it yourself, right? And that might look like little portable scanners, or even sometimes using mobile phones as they are now increasingly that have integrated app-based OCR or optical character recognition inside of them. On the other side of this diagram, there is what I would call more likely to be working with digitized documents. And this is an interesting phenomenon now because the fact that materials have been digitized, which by the way is not equal across the world, and I'm very aware of this coming from the Middle East, and I would imagine that the same thing would be true from India, digitization is not in the same state as it is, and I mean digitization of archival materials or historical collections, is not in the same state that it has been historically in the West. And that's simply because of resources, money, and infrastructure. But there are all these other new ways of thinking about making text out of, automating the process of making text. Some of them have been around for a long time, like OCR, and some of them like HTR, this neural network or AI-powered way of doing transcription, has been around for a short period of time. I would be remiss to mention the question of transcription without speaking of the hidden figures behind transcription. One of the things we've heard a lot about in recent years is about the digitization processes of books in something like Google Books. And so you see very often fingers or gloves or mistakes somehow in the digitization of books that recall the presence of the workers, of the labor who are doing work there in that process. But that's actually not necessarily, it's also present very much in the world of transcription. If you actually search transcription online, it certainly, I see it the most from my web in Abu Dhabi. What I end up with are offshore data entry services that were lots of people who would like to do that process for me, including things like getting medical reports transcribed or legal reports, or even, as you see in the bottom middle, handwritten transcriptions. And one has to wonder what kinds of work goes into those. So if we think about this idea of optical character recognition, which is the ability to turn a text into some digital text, some digital machine operable text, into some text that would look like what you would type in a document on your own computer. It's very often said that English is really very well developed. And that certainly is true when we're talking about English that is modern English. If you move, however, into the past, just a little bit into historical materials, and you move into this field called historical OCR, you're in a completely another world. And so there's been a really interesting report that was put out at the Mellon Foundation, by David Smith and Ryan Cordell, about agendas for historical OCR and being able to use our forms of artificial intelligence for opening up archives of the past, so opening up windows of the past. Now, if you may be familiar with this way of working with, let's see if I can get this to work. Right. So there's actually OCR that's AI powered inside of your own Google Drive. If you actually open up a file and you have an image file, and if you open up that file and you open it by right clicking and then selecting, as you can see here, open with Google Docs actually has a little engine that is going to then process that. And so for certain languages, it does actually a pretty good job. And for Arabic, Arabic that is printed Arabic, that is printed like a computer actually has printed out something, it does very well in. But if you move to handwritten texts, or if you move to archival materials like this particular one from the Svoboda diaries, and you try the same thing, what you end up with is actually quite garbage. The performance is not good at all. And so what I'd like to talk about in the time that remains is a couple experiments that I've done in thinking about how we might be able to work on this at the intersection of humanities and artificial intelligence. So Google Drive, but incidentally, will also do Chinese very well because Chinese has a lot of data. It's printed Chinese from the newspaper. This is from yesterday, a couple of days ago. Here's an Indian example, right? That this is in Canada. And this is, I don't know these scripts, so you can tell me if you see how good they do, but if my eye simply moves across them, I can see that there's a significant amount of correct responses out of it. We can also find the same thing. I found the same thing from an article about sports and COVID this morning in Malayalam. And again, I'd be interested to know from you how you actually see that the automatic ones have done. Now, if you wanted to actually do this with historical documents, in other words, not with media text, which is, by the way, most of what trains AI, you're in a different world. Imagine the text on the right-hand side, which is a text that I worked on with a group that was interested in crowdsourcing the transcription of medieval French documents. What would you do? Well, there's a whole lot of steps that actually go into this process. First of all, you have to decide what characters correspond to things on the screen. You have to create what's called ground truth, making a transcription that corresponds so that the computer can learn that these letters or these groups of letters or these groups of words correspond to some other science, kind of a signifier signified problem in computing. And then you have to process these and you have to train a model. And then the idea is it's an active learning, meaning that the computer learns, it gives you back something, and then you give it more information and you retrain the model. It's a kind of recursive, interesting process. So here are some examples of some things that we've been doing at NYU Abu Dhabi on this very topic. So those British residency papers, those colonial papers that I spoke about before, we're actually interested in this one. And the problem here is that not all the papers are written in the same hand. So if you can think about it, it's kind of easy to get a computer font and to translate that via OCR into text. But then everyone's handwriting is slightly different. And so that's a very tricky problem. When we turn to the case of Arabic, Arabic actually works very well because it imitates in its cursive style something that looks like handwriting. If we train with old materials, like we have training data for old materials from the 19th century of religious texts, and we move to the 1980s in Beirut, do we do a good job? Does one font and one genre apply to another one? It's a very interesting problem, and the questions are not answered here. What I can tell you very quickly is that this very interesting is that in this image here of the text on the left-hand side, that you are missing diacritics, and you're also missing a lot of the kind of the editorial markings that you might find in a more contemporary edited text in Arabic. And so when you train without them, guess what? They disappear in the new transcribed versions. You can also work from writing system to writing system. We've done some work with my colleague Subhan Kirmazaltan on Ottoman Turkish and on writing systems. Ottoman Turkish is a Arabic script language that was the script of which was actually forbidden in the 1920s with language reforms in Turkey. And so now people in Turkey read in left to right Latin text. So our question is, can we actually move from one to the other? And we found that we can, but the question is that you have to still remain extraordinarily critical, not only with the inputs in the transcription systems, but with the outputs as well. Here's a case where we've been working with the Louvre Abu Dhabi on thinking about medieval French and medieval Latin and thinking about writing systems that are really very old. On the left-hand side, 13th century, on the right-hand side, 14th century, but in a bilingual culture where people and scribes were certainly reusing different forms across. And so just deciding which are the letter forms in Unicode that you're going to assign to each of these things becomes quite a process. And then finally, a new domain for us is thinking about Arabic handwritten texts. And the problem in the Middle East is that archives and museums have not digitized a lot of handwritten material. And so one of the places that we're actually working to, this is not a particularly more complicated of a project than any other handwritten text recognition. The problem is actually in where to find the materials. And so here we're turning to social media because it's actually the place where people exchange. This is an example on Twitter where people exchange archives that belong to their families. So why digital humanist in the loop? Well, this is, as I told you before, it's a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek expression, picking up on the idea of a human in the loop. Well, transcription has to be a critical process. We have to ask ourselves, what's the purpose? Who's the audience? What do we want to capture? How important is the structure? What are the cultural and historical contexts? How much information do you have? How much of a scale do you want to work on? Are you talking about 300 pages like the medieval French example that we worked on? Or are you talking about 50,000 volumes like the printed Arabic one in Arabic collections that we have? And finally, and in a very important one, not to be left out, is how much time, money, and IT infrastructure do you have? And how well do the people in your institution get along in a transdisciplinary way? So here are some high-level takeaways of my talk today. Unlike the examples of Google that we saw above, HTR platforms provide a kind of user-level cooperation with AI. There's a close relationship between humanities, context knowledge, and computing. Turnkey solutions for historical humanities are unlikely soon and also in the distant future. I really don't think we're going to see that. When we talk about automatic transcription, it's not a pushing of a button. It requires informed human input now and perhaps always. But also, to echo something that I said before, because transcription is situated between product and process, it is an act of intellectual creation and really must remain critical as such. In summary, I'd like to say that digital humanists, people who are involved in these questions and the understanding of translation and movement between these worlds, need to be in the loop. There needs to be a cooperation between a man and a machine, not only an interaction. And on the slides that I've shared with you, I've also included my research citations. Thank you very much for your attention today.
Thank you very much, sir, for your insightful theme address. And now I request today's final theme speaker, Dr. Arjun Ghosh, Associate Professor, Department of Humanities and Social Science, Indian Institute of Technology, New Delhi, India, to enlighten us on the topic, exploring open data sources for the humanities. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. I would imagine that this is the 11th lecture in the series. So so probably some of the issues that I would be touching on would be familiar with you. You would already be familiar with them. However, there might be some new members in the audience, so please excuse if there is something that you've already aware of. And this is something that you would already be knowing, that traditionally literature scholars would work with close reading very, very carefully, doing critical analysis of texts. But with computation, it is possible to sort of sort of engage in distant viewing, distant reading of texts, right? So, and Google Ngrams is one of them. I don't want to spend much time on that. This is a tool that you can try out, and it should be self-explanatory for you right now. And distant reading can typically, one of the things that works with is that it works with both unstructured data and structured data. In the humanities, when you're working with, in the humanities, you work with a lot of unstructured data. And that is what David was talking about, the digitized books, the OCR, and getting them in the form of digitized text and then analyzing them. There's a lot of process of cleaning up the documents. On the other hand, it is also possible that from born digital sources that you get structured data. What is the difference between unstructured and structured data? It's clearly structured data, which is in some sort of format. So for starters, you can say that a kind of a spreadsheet or a CSV format or a JSON format. These are data which can be put into some sort of a table or some sort of a matrix. But mostly humanities, we deal with unstructured data, and so therefore there's a lot of effort which goes into structuring that data and cleaning that data up, and then engaging in quantitative sort of analysis. Giving you some examples, which I'm sure some of you will already know. For example, here is one particular project which dealt with looking at the front covers of a magazine, and trying to get what kind of trend that is. So that if you're looking for something, you can sort of pinpoint and then go inside and look at that particular image and do a close reading of it. But on the other hand, for born digital sort of content, like social media content, if you see a Twitter account, you see clearly this appears very human readable, but the machine obviously has a clearly structured format. There is the handle, there is the username, there's the date, there's the content, then you have a link, and then you have the number of comments and favorites, how many times retweets, etc. And this can neatly fit into a table for every single tweet. And of course, a certain time is also specified as to when the tweet went out, etc. So everything sort of, and then there are tools through which you can then extract all these tweets out and then analyze them. So tweets typically can come as very structured data, but also unstructured, because obviously there is the text. So you have to have a multi-pronged approach to analyzing them. So, and the great advantage of it, as I showed in terms of that the Google books or whatever, you can analyze many books together. You can read a scholar in their lifetime can read maybe a few thousand books. I don't know how much a person can really read, but a machine can read many thousands, probably million books very quickly. And that is something that you can try on Google Ngrams and you'll get an idea. So what I'm going to concentrate today on is a particular kind of work that I have tried to do in looking for structured data from born digital sources, and that is work on Wikipedia. I'll tell you a little bit about the choices about Wikipedia that I've made if there is time, but I'll go through a couple of sort of projects. You know that Wikipedia has these biographies, and I'm picking up two major historical figures from Indian history. And given that most of you are conversant with a little bit of Indian history, you would know that these are figures which have been controversial to a certain extent regarding building of a certain kind of narrative, how Shivaji engages with Afzal Khan and who is, and there is that question, and also there is a certain gap between what the scholarly historian sort of puts out and what goes on in the popular media. There is a portion of this talk which I offered elsewhere where I go through that entire Orientalist narrative and explain that, but I'm skipping that for the moment. But this is just for your understanding that there is a big gap between the kind of stories about Shivaji which go on in the popular sort of nationalist mode of thinking, and also about Padmini and her interaction with Alauddin Khilji. And what historians, professional historians, actually look at, through sources, and there's a big hiatus between what goes on in the popular domains like comic strips like Chitrakatha or TV, and television and all that, or in movies. But and it also becomes very, very important politically, given the current political climate in the country, and these are obviously very, very important for the public discourse altogether. Now, a little bit about Wikipedia. So if you go to a Wikipedia page, you'd see there's a top. Most of us don't go into all that, but this is something that is there, and then you can press the edit button and start editing the page straight away. You don't even need to log in. It will know. You can also log in, and then it gives you a revision history of every single revised page of that history. And what we find that there's constantly there are these edit wars that are happening. Somebody is trying to frame Shivaji in a certain way, or Afzal Khan in a certain way, or Khilji in a certain way. And then another person comes in. Sometimes there are bots which come in and try to clean up any entry that have been made which have not been cited. There are certain standards and protocols for Wikipedia to work. So even though anybody can edit, Wikipedia becomes a very, very important source because it is something that is monitored, that is sort of, in a sense, and kind of a non-academic peer review, very, very large scale review by many, many readers and followers of those articles. And so there is reversion of vandalism and other kinds of things. And there are these edit wars, people are adding things and all that. Now, what happens if you look at some of these pages have been through thousands and thousands of edits sometimes. Now, it is impossible for us to go through, for the human eye to actually go through and see where that edit war has actually happened. So what I do is I do a kind of n-gram study. I study specific words and look at their appearance and disappearance between various versions. And that sort of tells me that there is this question about whether Shivaji should be called Chhatrapati or not. And that sort of, and then I can pinpoint as to which version that particular controversy has taken place and go and read it closely. And then I can go to the top pages, look at that. So that's where the sort of the method really is, that distant reading, enabling close reading, because you obviously cannot read 5,000 pages of the same text evolving across maybe 10 years. And this is a treasure trove really, because this is when you take a normal book, you obviously the writers have written it, and sometimes you'll have the manuscript which will have scribblings, and then sometimes the writer would have just discarded a particular version of it. But here is a document where the live editing constantly is available in its various versions, and you can see what it's a very important sort of source of figuring out how public memory is getting noted down. And Wikipedia is one of the most visited sites, and a very good first source for material. And similarly, the other kinds of words, for example, discussion around the Johar, that is the self-immolation by Rani Padmini. That becomes an important controversy, and then we can go into and look at the differences between revisions very, very closely. For example, there's this, and here is a particular word, lustful, about whether Khilji was lustful. This is something that someone had been trying to put into the story many, many years ago and was unsuccessful. So anybody looks at the current document will have no source, no inkling that this had actually occurred. This sort of, and I would think that for a Wikipedia article, if I am as a digital humanist, as someone who's studying, I should look at that entire set of text, because it's obviously what happens with the digital media is that these texts are performative by nature. They're ephemeral, they're constantly changing. So, and the text is not fixed, it's not a printed document. So the only way I can get a grip on the idea of what a Wikipedia page is to look at its constant making and remaking and rebuilding and reconstruction. All right, and similar kinds of study could be made in other kinds of areas where there could be contentious. For example, there are many castes about which there are Wikipedia pages, and so I worked with an entire set of more than 400 pages on specific castes in India, and you see. If you look at other kinds of media, social media or others, question of caste becomes a very, very important sort of contentious question. A lot of trolling happens. People are attacked, when they assert certain kinds of politics of caste, and this kind of caste sort of warfare also gets into the editors and the kind of vandalism on the Wikipedia pages. Once again, and sometimes certain editors, certain writers on Wikipedia could be suspended for a limited period of time for repeated vandalism or other kinds of non-sanctioned kind of activities. So, and you can see that pages are very dynamic and they're constantly being edited. They're increasing or decreasing in sizes, and so obviously, and what you realize is that the back end, you have to work with certain tools. I write a script on R to be able to look through all that data, and then tokenize the words, and then read the. So whether Yadavs are Kshatriyas or not, you can identify that these are the terms around which the controversies have occurred over a long period of time. And there are many ways you can match and see which are the terms which are more difficult. So for example, here there is a word cloud where we can see which are the words which have constantly been removed by editors, and which are the terms which have been most of the times added by editors. So we can see that what are the terms around which these controversies really are, and then you can again go into close reading. All right, and the talk page is also around those dates, where the editors sort of converse with each other, make very interesting reading, because sometimes people are extremely volatile, or sometimes people are frustrated with they would really want to put their point of view across, whether or not it is supported by evidence, and there are other references to this. So I'll quickly go on to the next project. Another way of collecting data from Wikipedia is that Wikipedia on every particular item has at the back end has a Wikidata platform, right? On every item, which is a unique resource that is and has a particular number, as you can see there, in unique resource identifier on Wikidata, and it gives us and divides the statements into object and a predicate, and each object sort of can open up as its own URI again, and this is what is called linked data, right? Resource description framework. So you can say where Sundar Pichai was born, and then open up the RDF page for the page for Madurai, Wikidata page for Madurai, and you can get its coordinates. And you can do a lot with this data, extracting the data. Of course, you will need to be aware of coding, and typically in India, humanities scholars do not get introduced to coding. I myself, I'm trained in performance studies. Till a few years back, I had no idea of how to do coding. But I found that if I have to look at digital texts, there is no way that I can follow my close reading methods into it, and therefore I sort of dove into this and I dived into them and tried to learn. So what I have tried to do is, I have try to look at, for example, build a certain kind of sense of what are the various dynasties. So you get to sense who is linked to whom, and if there is this sense that in India in politics there are certain dynasties. Of course, dynasties are not something that is specific to politicians. It's also there among businessmen, but a place where dynasties are really rampant is within the film and entertainment industry. That is where nepotism really is. It's much more rampant than politics. And another point that I wanted to sort of share with you, I'll come to this a little later. Another piece of work that I have also tried to do is that by looking at places of birth, and I looked at how people move from one place to another for education, because it gives, against each person, it gives you the place for education and place of where the person died. And if you see, there's a large section of people, who move for education and then die there or die elsewhere. And if you see that it's mostly in certain cities, like in Bombay or in Kolkata or Lahore, where people are die where they were born, or the educated where they were born, right? And this frequency sort of keeps on changing as you move through the decades. So you find that Kolkata has started losing its luster by about the 1970s, really about the 1990s, and Bombay picks up after whereas Kolkata was really important as a city for education and livelihood pre-independence. But it is post-independence, after the partition, that Bombay really picks up, because there's a lot of migration that comes into Bombay post-partition. And but Bombay also sort of is, though it's still a very prominent city, it's sort of losing its way a little bit, moving away to newer important cities like Bangalore, Hyderabad, but if you think of states, Kerala also is something that is a state very important. So you can map out, create a map of migration of specific professions, either sports people or business people or artists, and see which are the important town centers of this in this country that are developing. So you can kind of create a certain kind of cultural history. Now I move on to this last bit, which is if I look at one of the important political families of this country, which the Gandhi family, and you see something very interesting here. You can of course see that there is Jawaharlal Nehru, Vijay Lakshmi Pandit, and others. But you see one particular name here, which you not usually look at, and that is Antonio Maino, because Sonia Gandhi is not there, right? And you find that obviously someone has gone online and named Sonia Gandhi as Antonio Maino in the English version. Clearly, this is part of a political agenda. And there's a lot of revision history, revision analysis. And this was there when I took the screenshot, right? And it may have happened. It is interesting to see. So when you're using Wikidata as a source, what you need to understand is that, the fact that it is a data which it shapes perception, and therefore there is a clash of ideas across how that data is going to be framed. And that's why an open data source like Wikidata or Wikipedia becomes important, because it is not cocooned within a certain kind of a closed environment. It is a Creative Commons platform, which sort of allows us to examine what is going on in the backend. This is something you would not really be able to do on a Twitter, or certainly not on Facebook, as to how they are manipulating, what are the algorithms through which they are organizing the data. But therefore, these kind of platforms become a very important source for research, authentic research, and we can also see what kind of social tensions, really are getting into this entire thing. So thank you for your attention. We can probably, I'll be welcome to take questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir, for your insightful theme address. Now, the floor is open for interaction. We will take up questions which we have received from the chat box and from the registration form. I request Vinay Sagar, sir, Assistant Professor, Department of Commerce, to moderate the interaction session. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Ishika. Very good evening to the speakers and the dignitaries. My first question is to Jennifer, ma'am. Jennifer, ma'am, can I?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Ma'am, how does digital humanities work as a bridge for interdisciplinary studies?
I think that's a fantastic question. And I think that it's one that I have really struggled with throughout my career. And in fact, I've been working alongside a project based in my home institution called Shape ID, which is actually intended to inform the European Commission about how to view interdisciplinarity. And I think one of the reasons they've drawn on my experiences so much is precisely because the digital humanities has this role to play in between the accepted disciplines. I think it acts as a bridge in part because there is, I would say, I'd be interested to hear what my fellow panelists think of this, but I don't think there is any way to deliver a digital humanities project from within a single discipline's set of values, set of methodologies, set of approaches. I think it has been one of the most important experiences of my move from the traditional humanities to the digital humanities is to learn how to collaborate and to trust other disciplines, because I am not able to assimilate that much information so deeply that I can become a scholar in all these different areas at once. Some manage to do several, but the work that I do spans at least 4 or 5 different disciplinary communities, and that's more than I can do. So I have to be respectful, I have to be humble, I have to listen, and I have to learn. And these for me are some of the values of interdisciplinarity that has come from having to work within a discipline or a field that means that we have to meet the needs and the requirements of some very different epistemic communities.
Thank you, ma'am. My next question is to David, sir. David, sir, can I?
Please.
Yeah. What challenges have you faced while working on human-computer cooperation in transaction of actives?
Great. So challenges. Wow, there's like so many that I can possibly say. I think that to pick up on the previous answer about interdisciplinarity, there's most certainly the question of when one brings together people who have very, very different agendas. The AI community is certainly not, for the most part, interested in historical humanities. And so to bring those communities together into a conversation that's a productive one, I can see both challenges and some real success stories. But to go to very specific challenges, I think that, as I mentioned, that when one is interested in multilingualism, I mean, I come from a comparative literature and multilingual academic background. When you're interested in different languages and the cultures that sit behind those languages and the traditions of the transmission of knowledge in those different cultures, that you face almost immediately inequality in terms of resources. And so AI is not actually, does not work equally well across all of those possible ways of writing and all of those possible. And so that was a bit the example that I was trying to give in showing the live clip from working with Google Drive, is that something that is, well, looks like media language is actually very easily translated from an image into text, because that's where the work is being done. So I think challenges, there's definitely inequality across language, but there's also inequality of infrastructure, right? I think that not everyone has at their disposal the kinds of resources that are required to do such work. And so there's a kind of a sliding scale between wanting to build a bespoke infrastructure for your own projects that solve very, very specific problems, and relying upon a community of people who understand that shared infrastructure is actually more beneficial, because everyone kind of learns, especially in the particular case of AI and transcription. The better that we get at doing this, the more we can actually begin to articulate some best practices across all of those different linguistic and historical scenarios. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, sir. My next question is to Arjun, sir. Sir, can I?
Please.
Yeah. What are the challenges in exploring open data sources for the humanities?
Well, I mean, I think open data sources themselves, if they are open, they should be accessible. So I think the challenges really remain in accessing data sources for the humanities and not open data sources specifically. I think David did answer a bit of that question, but if I can look at it specifically from the point of view of Indian scholars, I would like to say the following: is what I said during my talk. Is that digital humanities is a very new field for in India, and typically the humanities scholar, average humanities scholar in India, those who study literature or philosophy, even sociology, etc., they do not understand, they do not interface with technology or with programming skills at all till a much later stage, if they at all need it. And that sort of creates, that is a real challenge. And the second important challenge is that the paucity of resources in Indian languages, and David sort of tried to touch upon that, the fact that we need to have. So if you look at the growth of Wikipedia, though Wikipedia is one of the most viewed sort of sources even within India, Indian language Wikipedia is not really as much big, and therefore producing content and reading content in India. And for example, if you're looking at unstructured data, for example, we do not have enough protocols that will look at, for example, if you have to look at creating these word lists, word cloud, etc. You need to, very basic thing is you need to do lemmatization, you need to do basic things like which are the stop words, and you have to remove them. And we haven't yet developed that kind of protocol for many of the Indian languages to be able to do that off the shelf through packages which are there for some of the European languages, or even other Asian languages like Chinese or other things. And of course, that's for born digital content. But for non-born digital content, which are digitized texts, of course, the problem is what David pointed out, that we do not have sufficiently advanced OCR or HTR, and we really do not have a very strong database of digitized archives. We have archives, but those archives remain very closed in not very well maintained sort of libraries and stuff like that because of positive funds, etc. Incidentally, I would like to say that at IIT Delhi, we are trying to address that. And right now I'm engaged in a project which is trying to develop a handwriting text recognition platform for Nastaliq, which is the script which uses Urdu. And the idea is that if we are able to develop this, because reading sometimes language like Urdu or Arabic, you cannot follow the kind of techniques which you would use for the European languages, because typically in these manuscripts, there wouldn't be these gaps between the words, right? So you have to take it at line length, and so you do not actually read them word by word, but you read it in it's a different kind of technique that maybe I'll talk about it in some other point of time. So that's what we are trying to develop. If we are successful, then maybe there could be a platform which will then go out and try to allow for deep search of imagine 19th century, early 20th century periodicals. And then you can really get into looking at humanities data in an Indian context. We really still need to take the baby steps in DH in India. And what is important for us to do is to have programs. IIT Jodhpur has currently probably the only MSc in program in digital humanities right now. But we need to have programs that are going to train humanities scholars in programming at a very early stage. Even, let's say, give options for people who are doing a BA or a master's in literature to actually learn some hands-on coding as an option, as a kind of a tool course. That is the only way we can address this question, I feel. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, thank you so much, sir. As we are running out of time, we are going to conclude with the Q&A session. Over to Ishika. Thank you.
Thank you very much, respected speakers, for answering the questions of the participants. And thank you, Vinay Salve, sir, for moderating the interaction session. A small announcement before presidential remarks. We will now send the feedback form link in the chat box as well as to your registered email, which will be active for the next 48 hours. Kindly fill the same and send back for e-certificates. The e-certificates will reach you within 7 to 10 days. Very shortly, we will meet in one more international webinar of our college. That is on 24th of this month. The topic is Intellectual Property Rights 3 in association with Stetson University, Florida, US, and University of Technology, Sydney, Australia. Now, I request Sri W.D. Ashok, sir, Honorary Trustee of Seshadripuram Educational Trust, to render the presidential remarks. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. This international webinar from the Seshadripuram Evening Degree College, Department of English, in association with Trinity College, Dublin, Ireland, and New York University, Abu Dhabi, UAE, this Digital Humanities Session 11, which has gone wonderfully with the speakers, Dr. Jennifer Edmond, Dr. David Joseph, and Dr. Arjun Ghosh, who have told about different aspects of digital humanities of their respective themes given today in the subjects. I would like to say that on the whole, the benefits of digital humanities will be coming up in the coming days in a more way. I can just say that this is an integration of qualitative and quantitative approach which is happening, and you can present and interlink digitalized texts and images and time-based media with maps and timelines and data and visualizations to put a data in a more better way, in a computerized way, so that data come about in a much better way in the coming days. And I would like to say that whatever the esteemed speakers have said, it is a combination of content management and data analysis, and it helps out in such a way that quicker access of information throughout the digital mode is brought about, and it enhances the teaching quality and improves the collaboration, provides a common platform for project development and group sourcing of materials, and facilitate local, regional, and global partnerships. With this today's humanities session, I can also say that can help into inform and engage those outside the universities for digital products also at the same time. Stressing on Dr. Jennifer has very good and stated that creating interdisciplinary with focus on language use and identity of information and around big data she has spoken about, and she also gave emphasis on the key outputs and findings and said about the critical digital humanities, about the keywords focuses and headline focuses, and how to serve the public outreach and activisms and collaborations to be brought together. At the same time, Dr. David sir has also given wonderfully regarding the archives, that is interaction loops, why the transcriptions are necessary, human computer interactions are necessary at the same time. The reasons of transcriptions were brought about wonderfully, the transcription of text creations, and how Arabic texts are to be used and how it can be translated or transcriptions are being done in the Arabic world. He has given wonderfully. And on the summary, Dr. David sir said that digital humanities needs to be in the loop. There needs to be a cooperation between man and machine, not only interactions. So I just want to say that wonderfully he has concluded it. And Dr. Arjun also has stated that the structured and unstructured data of our Indian history pages in Wikipedia, how it has to be, the text added or text edited must be counted at the same time. And all this has gone about in a wonderful session of the international webinar today, which was held by Seshadripuram Evening Degree College. Thanks to the coordination of the students of Seshadripuram Evening Degree College, and also thanking the coordinators, Rajat sir and Darapa Annur sir, and to thank Principal N.S. Satish sir also at the same time. Thank you one and all for today's participation.
Thank you, sir, for rendering the presidential remarks. I now request Malika Arjun of third year BCom to propose the vote of thanks. Over to you, Malika Arjun.
Thank you, Ishika. Good evening to one and all. Myself, Mallikarjun M, final year BCom student of Seshadripuram Evening Degree College. It's my privilege to propose vote of thanks on behalf of Seshadripuram Evening Degree College on this occasion. At the outset, I thank Trinity College, Dublin, Ireland, and New York University, Abu Dhabi, UAE for associating with us to conduct this international webinar. I would like to express our sincere gratitude to Dr. Jennifer Edmond, Associate Professor at Trinity College, the University of Dublin, Ireland, for presenting an interesting theme talk. I am humbled and grateful to you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. I would like to express our sincere thanks to Dr. David Joseph Wrisley, Associate Professor of Digital Humanities, New York University, Abu Dhabi, UAE for presenting an excellent team talk. Thank you, sir, for your valuable words. I would like to acknowledge a sincere thanks to Dr. Arjun Ghosh, Associate Professor in the Department of Humanities and Social Science at the IIT New Delhi for presenting the team talk. Thank you, sir. I express our sincere thanks to Sri W.D. Ashok sir, Honorary Trustee, Seshadripuram Educational Trust for rendering the presidential address. Thank you, sir. My special thanks to our beloved young and energetic principal, Professor N.S. Satish sir, who is the robust of our Seshadripuram Evening Degree College. Thank you, sir. I would like to thank Darapa Konnur Program Coordinator, Rajat BS, Coordinator of IQSC, who helped us to maintain. I express our gratitude to all the principals, conveners, and members of our sister institutions, our colleges, and research scholars, students, and guests across the global for participating in this webinar. Thank you, one and all. I would like to convey my heartfelt gratitude to Seshadripuram Evening Degree College for giving us this special opportunity to host this international webinar. We will ever remain grateful to our teaching and non-teaching staff and administrative staff for their support. Thank you. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you, Mallikarjun. Once again, thank you, one and all. Principal sir, can we conclude the webinar?
Sure, ma'am. Thank you, Jennifer, ma'am. Thank you, David, sir. Thank you, Arjun, sir, for joining with us. Thank you. Ashok, sir, thank you, sir.
Thank you.